Okay, how's everybody doing tonight? I'm hoping that everyone had a nice day sitting behind your computers, I'm sure, for way too many hours. I think I'm on my second pair of glasses. So good evening. My name is Kevin Lyons. I'm the co-chair of the President's Task Force on Carbon Neutrality and Climate Resilience, along with my other co-chair, Bob Kopp. I'd like to welcome you and thank you for attending tonight. We are excited to have you here for our second round of town halls. We had some back earlier in the year, if you remember, but this is our second go round and our second night. We had our first night last night, and tonight we're going to continue with that. So a lot has happened since our first round of town halls in February this year, but the task force has remained really committed to the goal of delivering and developing a climate action plan for Rutgers. And the overwhelming response to these town halls tells us that you are also committed to working with us as well and doing good for Rutgers. But before we get started, I'd like to do a couple of housekeeping rules. So everybody on this town hall will be muted until the breakout sessions. So take advantage of using the chat to start accumulating your questions so that when we get to the point where we are doing Q&A and the breakout sessions, then you'll have a lot of dialogue that you can refer back to. Your questions will not get lost. So even though there might be an accumulation of a lot of questions, Angela or Angie will be taking a look at those, and we'll be monitoring the questions for throughout the night. So last night we had the first half of our task force group presenting panels, and then we had breakout sessions. And the first night we were focusing on carbon neutrality. Tonight you'll hear from the remainder of the working groups, and we'll be focusing on climate resilience during the breakout sessions. Before the end of the meeting, I want you to make sure that you take time to participate in Menti. Menti is a tool that we use to accumulate your thoughts. So it's going to produce thought clouds. So I'm going to mention that throughout the entire night, and of course at the end of the night. So we're going to have a link that we're going to put into the chat, which will display the Menti link. And then again, throughout the night, we want you to go there and just sort of put your ideas and thoughts about tonight. So let's officially get started. We're going to have an opening remarks from our university president, recorded remarks. And then after that, we're going to go ahead and get started with the program. So Matt, could you play the recorded video, please?
Good evening, and thank you for joining us for the second night of our Climate Town Hall. As I said in my remarks last night, we are dealing with intersecting crises, a pandemic that has already taken 1.2 million lives across the world and created economic hardship, a global racial reckoning touched off by the brutal killing of George Floyd, and a climate crisis that becomes more and more severe and whose effects will be with us for generations to come. As the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us, not all members of society are impacted equally by disruptive events. In our country, the impacts of the virus, including death, have been disproportionately high in low-income communities of color. Similarly, the impacts of climate change are not and will not be felt evenly across all communities. Our sense of justice calls on us to address these inequities as we devise smart solutions to climate change. In creating a robust climate action plan, we can set forth a strategy that is attentive to this reality, one that advances the goal of climate justice. One of the key goals of developing our climate action plan is for Rutgers to be a catalyst for climate positive and equitable economic development in our home communities and across New Jersey. Here again, I believe we have an opportunity to be a leader. These town halls are a key step in the process that will culminate in that plan. We're excited you're here tonight, and I look forward to your participation as we envision Rutgers' climate future. Thank you.
Okay, so you can see the university president is committed. The handoff between President Barchi and President Holloway was really smooth, and it was really refreshing to see the university president really jump in and adopt and be really behind the work that we're doing. So what I'm going to do for the next couple minutes now is I'm going to share my update with the group. So I'm going to share my screen. Hold on one second. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. So it's going to be a very short 8-slide presentation so we can jump right into our panel discussions. So I wanted to give you a brief update of what we've been up to this point. So our task force goals were, number one, climate neutrality, and that's contributing to achieving the global net zero carbon dioxide emissions for the university. And then number two, climate resilience. Okay, so that's enhancing the capacity of the university and the state of New Jersey to manage the risks of climate change. So we have some challenges and also some opportunities, and I've listed them here. So obviously the university is massive, and it's grown, of course, with our fellow medical school. So we have 100,000 students, faculty, and staff, which is the equivalent of a small city, overlying about 10 square miles across the state of New Jersey. 950 buildings, 29 million square feet of floor space. 42% of those buildings, however, are 50 years or older. We have underground pipes and sewer lines that have to get the resources to all of our buildings. Dining services remains one of the largest food service operations in higher education. Again, with that comes the population of our students, occupying over 16,000 beds, which is also pretty significant across the country. The campus bus system, I'm sure all of you are aware of that, is also pretty significant and massive, so that takes on transportation. Our budget is pretty significant when it comes to the operation of all of our facilities and our operations at the university. We spend quite a bit on procurement, which is my area of specialty, looking at what we buy and how we buy it. And then ultimately, when you think about what comes into the university, a lot has to go out. So we also have a pretty significant waste management and recycling program as well. But we also have deferred maintenance. And basically that means that we have to put off maintaining some of our facilities and prioritizing them to make sure that we're doing the best that we can to maintain our buildings. So we also took some time to obviously compare ourselves to other universities and colleges around the country. And we wanted to do that comparison based on the size and scope of our schools. So the Big Ten schools who have been in this for some period of time is an area for us to have some lessons learned. So as you can see, from Michigan State to Ohio State, Penn State, some of these universities have been involved with the climate action plans for some time. So they have neutrality target dates. Most of them are averaging in that 2050 period. And then off to the right, you can see the impacts that they've been able to make. So the actual reductions range from a small percentage in the single digits, 6%, all the way up to 32%. And that's done again with a combination of all the different areas within the university, from transportation, from supply chain waste management, energy systems in our buildings, land. It all is encompassing and all involved with the climate reductions. So for us, we have a timeline to deliver the final climate action plan to the university president by June of 2021. And what you're seeing on the screen now is just sort of our timeline that's going to get us there. So where we are right now, we're in that May to October 2020 timeframe. Hopefully most of you were able to attend the brilliant climate Institute Symposium, which I thought was one of the best symposiums of the year. We are now back in our working groups, finishing up phase number 2. So that'll be available soon for everyone to take a look at and make comments on before we move on to phase number 3, which is the climate scenarios. So basically taking all of the potential solutions and recommendations in phase 2 and start building this structure so that we can then get to the point where we can identify implementable concepts and ideas that will ultimately go into the phase 4, the finalized climate action plan. So the town halls that we are having, it's for you guys to participate in the language and give us your thoughts about what we have been working on so far. As I said, phase 2 will be available to the general public probably within a week or 2. And so we'll be hoping that you'll take a look at that and be able to comment. And then what we're going to be doing tonight is helping us start to think about phase 3. So we're going to start to look at some of the scenarios that we came up with as a team, and then start to put those into action. So we are going to answer a couple questions as it relates to that. So that is, what is carbon neutrality and a more resilient Rutgers, and what are we actually aiming for? And then again, task number 3, we'll figure out how to put those building blocks that we put together in phase 2 together in order for us to get to that goal. And then once we get there and deliver the report, then of course the hard work is going to be executing, putting it into play, and then making sure that the entire university is participating. So what I would like to do now, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'd like to begin now with the process of introducing Brian Ballentine, who is our Senior Vice President of the University for Strategic Plans and for Senior Vice President for Strategy and a Senior Advisor to the President. Sorry about that. And Brian's going to be the facilitator of a panel that's going to talk about some of the work that's been done in those working groups, so that this way you'll hear a little bit more about what they've been up to. Brian will have some questions for them. And then again, please use the chat to start to accumulate your thoughts and possibly some questions, because at the end of the panel discussion, there'll be some time for some Q&A. So Brian, take it away.
Thanks, Kevin. And thanks to everybody who's here. I recognize a lot of the names from last night, but also see some new faces. So indulge me, those who are returning, if you hear some repeats from my opening comments yesterday, but I do want to reiterate the thank you and the appreciation to this committee for the amount of work they've put into this under some very difficult circumstances. And really my admiration at how they've stayed on track and the scope of the undertaking. Kevin's timeline that he just showed, anybody who's been around and seen some committees knows that it doesn't always go like that and doesn't always have that degree of planning. And so it's really a remarkable job. And to echo what President Holloway said in his opening comments, now my job is to help guide and support major strategic projects at the university. And what we're talking about tonight is really right in the heart of what Rutgers can be and what it should be. And the work that this group is doing is really helping chart the future for the university. So tonight we'll have, sorry, cat. Tonight we'll have 4 of the 7 task force working groups present their brief analysis from phase 2. We're going to be hearing from transportation, food and water systems, climate preparedness, and climate positive, equitable economic development. So we'll go through all 4 of these presentations back to back, and then we'll have half an hour or so for a Q&A. As Kevin said, please do be putting your questions into the chat as people are presenting, and we'll organize and look for themes and try to surface many good questions as we can. And just to clarify, these slides will be available after the talk. This is being recorded, so all of this information can be reviewed. So let's begin with Bob Noland, who is the co-chair for the Transportation Working Group. Bob is the director of the Alan Voorhees Transportation Center and distinguished professor at the Ballentine School. Bob, if you're there, could you share your screen?
I'm here. I'll try to share. Let's see how this works. And that's not working. I spent 5 minutes figuring this out the other day in another presentation. And okay, can everyone, is that all set? Okay, let me go through this. Okay, so we were the Transportation Working Group consisting of the people that you see on this slide. And I'm going to talk about what we did. And a lot of this, well, almost all of this is based on a survey that was sent out to the university community back at the end of August, early September, to gather information on mainly on various travel habits to the university and some issues of what people might do under certain circumstances. We also had some administrative data from the university to estimate other elements of transportation. So our initial task from this was an inventory of baseline carbon emissions at the university. And just to give you our full number, and this includes Rutgers, Camden, and Newark, we have 91,974 metric tons from transportation. And the bulk of that comes from commuting to campus, which is this large blue slice here in this pie chart, so over 77,000 metric tons. University fleets, which includes buses, was about 4,800 or almost 4,900 metric tons. That is the little orange slice here. Business travel, which is mainly air travel, in this case, about 9,000 metric tons. Two smaller components that we looked at was study abroad travel by students. That was only 7 metric tons, and athletics travel, which was 10 metric tons. We did not have for these, for the athletics and the fleets and the business travel, we only had data for New Brunswick. So this is not fully complete, but it's largely is because here you see New Brunswick accounts for the vast majority of the emissions just because there are a lot more students, faculty, and staff there. And so that's just based on these numbers here. So we also looked at potential solutions. And we didn't analyze all of these at this point, but the ones that we analyzed in detail are in red. So expanding telecommuting, working at home, and remote instruction. Creating incentives for faculty, staff, and students to convert their vehicles to a battery electric vehicle, which is going to be far more efficient and less polluting. We also looked at enhancing public transit discount programs or free transit. Ones that that I'm not going to talk about, but I'll just mention them, is reducing business travel, but really purchasing carbon offsets and how much that would cost. Estimate was about $9 million per year, just so you get a ballpark feel. Creating safe bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. We will be having a studio course at the Ballentine School next semester that's going to work on that, at least for the New Brunswick campus, to set out a plan. We did not look at providing a parking cash out, which is another policy to try to get people to not drive to work by providing them in basically creating an opportunity cost for parking, which would be a market rate cost. In other words, giving people who do not drive the cash. But if you want to drive, you get the cash, but you got to pay for your parking with that cash. So it gives you an option. It creates actually a value that people have to decide then how much they want to park. Electrifying the bus fleet and other university owned or operated vehicles. We have not looked at that in detail, what the cost would be. And I have two of them here. I have parking cash out again. Okay. So let me talk about the ones that we did analyze. So the first was expanding telecommuting, working at home, remote instruction. And this was based on responses to our survey in terms of the likelihood of people wanting to continue to telecommute or engage in remote instruction after the pandemic. And broken down by faculty, staff, and students, you can see we could get a potential savings of over 21,000 metric tons. So that's a large share of that full 90,000 or so. The second policy was looking at providing incentives for purchasing battery electric vehicles. And we would do this by giving people a discount on their parking, those that are commuting. So we looked at we asked people, would you purchase a vehicle if you had a 25% parking price reduction or 50%? Obviously, there was more for the 50%. And breaking that down for the total, for the 25%, it was 3,600 metric tons. For the 50% price reduction, 10,000 metric tons of savings. We're not assuming any reduction in driving here. We're just assuming that those that the emission savings are coming from those who decide to purchase an electric vehicle. Okay. The other one, well, what happens if we can somehow figure out a public transit discount program or free transit? And we asked people, what would be the likelihood of commuting by transit if you were to have free transit? And total was over 5,000 metric tons. A lot of people. We asked also if you're able to commute by transit. Some people don't live in a location where it's feasible. For some people, it would take way too long. So it does not include those. This is really those who said it was feasible to commute by transit, at least some of the time. And I think that is it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Bob. Next, let's move to Xenia Morin, who's the co-chair of the Food and Water Systems Working Group. Xenia is the Senior Associate Dean for Learning and Associate Teaching Professor in the Department of Plant Biology and the Undergraduate Program Director for Agricultural and Food Systems. Xenia?
Thank you very much. I hope everyone can see my screen. I want to acknowledge Joe Charette, who's also attending today, as well as the other working group members. I also would like to acknowledge other people that we've called upon to help put our section of the report together, people from Working Group 4, as well as summer students who worked with us to look at water and waste, as well as our consultants, Brian Conway, who runs our dining services in Newark and Camden, as well as the World Resources Institute. Before I jump into our analysis, I want to remind you that the Rutgers food and water systems are actually quite complex and multifaceted. And when we talk about Rutgers and its food system, most of the work that I'm going to report on today has to do with Rutgers dining and all the operations that Rutgers controls. I'll talk briefly about the beverage and food supply chain, as well as some of the work that we've done on water. But our community is much bigger than that. It includes our farms and our fisheries in New Jersey and adjacent states. It includes people like the value-added processors and wholesalers, our caterers and our vendors, as well as restaurants that are near our campuses, our grocery stores that our off-campus students shop at. But I also want to point out that many of our students work in the food system as well, through our dining halls, as well as in places around the state. We've been doing some mapping exercises. This is just an example from Newark, but we now have a much better handle over what our food system looks like from a map perspective, and that will be in our interim report. Now, really, there are several strategies that we can use for reducing the greenhouse gas emissions associated with food. These are three that were highlighted by Project Drawdown. And today I'm really going to focus on waste and diets. Shifts in agricultural practices are something that we can tackle in the long term. And we heard yesterday about some of the land use changes and land management changes we can do from another working group yesterday. So far we've done an evaluation of the food that we purchase through Rutgers Dining. And just to give you a sense of how much that is in our baseline year, financial year 2019, we served over 6.2 million meals. And this is equivalent of about 33,000 meals per day when the students are on campus. Our greenhouse gas emissions are shown here on the right. And the real bottom line is that 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions from food come from consumption or purchase of beef. But maybe surprisingly, chicken is second at 28%. We do not have additional data on greenhouse gas emissions from gourmet dining. We're working on that, as well as some of our other food-related members. But what I want to tell you is that one reason that our total food footprint is fairly small, and it's about 4% of the whole Rutgers greenhouse gas emissions, is because Rutgers Dining has been doing things for a long time. They've been following the food recover hierarchy of trying to reduce sources, reduce the amount of excess food that we buy. There's been sustainable sourcing. We've been tracking our greenhouse gas emissions. We give food to student pantries. And one of our longest term food waste reduction strategies have been feeding pigs. So if you've been in Bush Dining Hall and scraped the food off of the plate, that food has gone to the pigs. Stories of this going back to horse and buggy days, so maybe 100 years of innovation. We have reusable bag and bottle programs in our meal plans that have saved over $1.5 million items of cups and straws that have gone to the landfill. Anyway, and the list goes on. We also have similar sustainability measures from gourmet dining. They have, like Rutgers Dining, implemented trayless dining, a plastic bag free initiative from the students. So now you have reusable bags. They are tracking their food waste in their kitchens, and they have embraced something called Stop Food Waste Day, something that we could do more broadly. And again, these items will be in our report, and I don't expect in 5 minutes I can cover all of them. But I want to say that we've also started looking at our water systems. We heard at the last town hall meeting that people were concerned about the water that they were drinking. We've looked into lead, and can tell you that our systems don't have lead, and that hydration stations are available across our 3 campuses. Rutgers Dining now hands one of these wonderful bottles to every student who enters their meal plan. So when we look at potential solutions, we're looking at shifting our menus at our Rutgers Dining locations to a plant-forward diet, meaning that we're going to reduce the amount of meat that is available and have more vegetarian and vegan options. There are a lot of co-benefits to that, from health, environmental health, holding on to our agricultural landscapes, increasing biodiversity. Refed, which is a nonprofit that looks at food waste, has 27 different solutions. And one of the things we need to look at more broadly is connecting our food waste streams to those of our local counties and exploring an anaerobic digester or commercial composting at a county level. reducing food, plastic is another thing. Water bottles have a significant carbon footprint. And if we move to reusable water bottles and hydration, we can reduce the carbon footprint up to 1,000. Anyway, there are lots of things that we can do. And finally, I want to talk about refrigeration management. The greenhouse gas warming potential of refrigerants is incredibly high. And so we need to think about the refrigerators that our students bring to campus or their off-campus locations, our building design as well as consumer education. So we believe that we can look at a 25% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. We're part of the Menus of Change University Research Collaboration, which has already made some commitments. And there are at least 26 member institutions moving in this direction. So we have a lot of other groups, but I can say Rutgers is a lead. We can look at consumer education campaigns as well, look at climate-friendly food labels, healthy eating, healthy dining team, educating peers, and more. So Brian, I know I'm out of time, but I want to just say that there's a lot that we think that we can do to bring down the greenhouse gas emissions. So I think I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Xenia. That's great, and a lot, certainly a lot to think through. Next, let's turn to the Climate Preparedness Working Group, which is co-chaired by Robin Lychenko. Robin is a professor and chair of the Department of Geography and the co-director for Rutgers Climate Institute. Robin, it's all yours.
Hey, everyone. Sorry, my computer's a little slow for some reason. So that was great. And I hope everyone has already had dinner because that presentation made me very hungry. So my group is, it's a little different than the groups that you guys have been hearing about. It's sort of focused on climate preparedness. So kind of the other side of climate change, sort of what does climate change mean? What are the impacts of climate change? We had a big working group, and I just want to give a little shout out to the 4 folks that I've starred here, our research and writing leads. These were all graduate students who helped us tremendously helped us over the summer with this work. So thanks so much, you guys, for all that work. So I just wanted to start out with a little bit of a reminder that Rutgers is, very vulnerable. This is a New Brunswick shot from about 5 or 6 years ago. And this wasn't a sort of this wasn't a named storm. This isn't a day that anyone may remember. It was May Day, 2014, but just sort of that reminder that Rutgers campuses, all 3 campuses, New Jersey itself, is extremely vulnerable to climate impacts of all sorts. And so one of the first tasks of our working group was actually to take a look at critical climate risks for the 3 Rutgers campuses, to really think, if we're thinking about preparedness, what are we really trying to prepare for? So this survey of climate risks was actually coupled with a discussion with all of the other sectors, all the other working groups, to discuss, sort of for what kinds of risks are affecting energy, what kinds of risks are affecting buildings, what kinds of key climate risks do the other sectors see, and so what do we really need to be paying attention to? So just from this is a sort of a quick table, but we have a fairly lengthy discussion of each of these climate risks with the kind of an in-depth assessment based on the work of the New Jersey Office of the State Climatologist. So that was sort of a piece of our work. Then, sort of, as I already said, sort of tying that work with each of the different sectors was sort of another critical part. So we went through and thought in terms of building each of the sectors that you guys have been hearing about, as well as adding on a couple of other sectors, health and so forth, to think about in each of these sectors, what kinds of risks do these sectors need to be preparing for as the sectors are preparing for climate, sort of think about carbon neutrality in the future. What kind of future what kind of future do they need to be thinking about, and what kinds of climate risks and climate stresses might sort of potentially sort of make it even more challenging to plan for carbon neutrality. That was a critical piece of the work. Then another critical piece of our work was taking a look at climate risks by group. I'm just showing the results for students. And we ended up focusing largely on students. We had hoped originally, prior to the COVID sort of situation, we had hoped to do a much broader look at communities and sort of with more outreach, but we sort of were, a little bit constrained, as everyone has been with COVID, but we were able to get I think a very good detailed look from talking with the student work group on the task force, as well as reaching out with other students and getting other input around thinking about which students are critically at risk. And this was sort of a theme, back to our climate justice theme that we started with, thinking about who is most vulnerable at Rutgers and why, and sort of how can we intervene to help and reduce the vulnerabilities of for example, students already experiencing food insecurity, students who have physical and mental health concerns, students living in unair conditioned housing, students who are commuting, et cetera, students who have family members. And then, of course, thinking about broader categories, our Black, Indigenous, and students who are people of color, international students who are in spaces that that may be putting them at risk already, and then how do climate risks sort of intersect? And we actually, this was the COVID, for all the harm it's done, it actually has certainly revealed vulnerabilities that I think we didn't really necessarily pay attention to. that really came out in our discussion. We had a little case study of lessons from COVID and how can that help us for climate preparedness. So was another piece. And then just I guess just to wrap up, our report is quite lengthy and there's a lot of detail in it, but just I think really it's very clear climate risks affect all dimensions of the mission of Rutgers, the teaching, research, and service missions. In planning for carbon neutrality, we really need to be thinking about climate risks. And New Jersey is, as I've already said, it's really in the bullseye of many, many very significant climate change risks. There's many opportunities where resiliency action and carbon neutrality can be complementary. And so I think as the task force is moving into phase 3, thinking about where are those points where we can really intersect. And then I really think, although I think our work group did a good job and was, certainly we worked very hard. There is really a need for a much, more in-depth and more comprehensive plan for climate, or assessment of climate impacts by sector, assessment of vulnerabilities. Like it's beyond just sort of something that a task force, working over the summer with a bunch of students can do. It really, it's a very sort of serious undertaking that I think, something moving forward for the university to take on. So that is it for our group, and I look forward to the questions. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Robin. Our final panelist tonight is Jessica Paolini, who is the co-chair for the Climate Positive Equitable Economic Development Working Group. Jessica is the Assistant Director of Economic Development and Innovation at the New Jersey Agricultural Experiment Station. Jessica, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Brian. So I just want to acknowledge our other co-chairs, Carl Van Horn and Peggy Brennan, and our work group members who are listed here. And we also had support from graduate students at Blaustein. The work of this committee has been a real team effort, and we appreciate everyone's engagement. So the very first task of our working group was to define climate positive, equitable economic development. Each of the working groups, whether they were focused on food systems or waste management, are thinking critically about how what they are recommending can further the transition toward a climate positive economy and what equity considerations need to be addressed. For the final report that we recently completed, we wanted to get a lay of the land to understand what programs and policies exist at Rutgers and more broadly in New Jersey. Then we looked at programs at peer universities and in cities and countries around the world. And this information informed our recommendations of solutions. So first, we conducted an inventory of existing programs at Rutgers that focus on economic development, climate change, or social equity, and that have an applied or outbound component. And we identified over 50 programs, including many student groups, but less than a dozen that cross over 2 or more topics. So having a focus on social equity and economic development, for example. So this may be low-hanging fruit to see where there are synergies and opportunities to connect or expand programs to incorporate aspects of climate change, equity, and economic development. We also did a very top-level inventory of programs in Rutgers host communities, and there are a number of relevant initiatives, but an important next step for the task force is to pursue in-depth engagement with these programs. It was something that we were hoping to accomplish over the summer, and unfortunately with COVID and other, we weren't able to get to that, but it's definitely an important next step for the task force. The work of the task force is well aligned with state policy goals, including the New Jersey Energy Master Plan and New Jersey Executive Order 23, which is focused on environmental justice. And this can offer opportunities for linking with and leveraging state level initiatives. So looking at models across the US and around the world, some of the most inspiring and relevant examples that we came across were the APLU Innovation and Economic Prosperity Award winners. And in Europe, some of the broad trends we saw among universities were their active engagement in economic development, including in developing green infrastructure and working to attract new companies to their host communities, and their focus on transitioning heavily polluting industries toward more climate-friendly policies and practices. So in the end, we came away with a number of recommendations, which we broadly categorized into 3 buckets: resiliency, business and economic development, and coalition building. Our recommendations around resiliency are largely focused on Rutgers host communities and opportunities for partnership with community groups to work toward mutual goals that benefit the Rutgers community, as well as residents of New Brunswick, Newark, and Camden. Some of the specific recommendations under the resilience category include conducting rapid health impact assessments of proposed task force solutions, and integrating university and municipal infrastructure for community resilience, such as heating and cooling centers. There are a number of ways that Rutgers can build on its role as an anchor institution, advancing business incubation and workforce development, making investments in green infrastructure, and more. And I mentioned it earlier, but there's a need for integration of existing programs, which can potentially be managed and organized under a sustainability or other formal office. And that's all I have, Brian. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Jessica. Okay, so it looks like we've got about 15 minutes for questions. I want to make sure that we keep this show on track for the breakout groups that will start at 7. I'd like to give, if we can, each panelist a chance to answer questions that have come in through the chat. And I think if we could go back to where we started with Bob Noland, and see a number of questions that have come up around telecommuting. And I wonder if one of the ways I'm struck by the fact that I see a lot of private industry moving strongly towards telecommuting. I think universities, for lots of good reasons, are a little bit warier in that realm and tend to be a bit more deliberative. But I wonder if you could talk about models that you've seen around telecommuting, how you assess it, how you think about what an implementation of a telecommuting in a framework like what you've described would look like in an ideal world. Bob, I think you're muted.
Sorry, that's a good question. I was looking at David Hughes's question, which I think is where this is coming from. So first of all, in our estimations, we accounted for where people, or at least how far they said they traveled and how frequently they traveled already. So that estimate is additional benefit from if people were to telecommute more. And the question was also linked to their current experience. If it's something they want to continue, in telecommuting does not mean you do it every day of the week. It means you might do it once a week, 2 or 3 times a week, or something like that. Now, having said that, to address David's question, there is some truth that if someone, it's not an endogenous event. If someone is able to telecommute, they may live further away. And so the times that they do come in, they're driving a longer distance. There are all sorts of other issues that get involved here in terms of thinking about, and there was another question about trying to get faculty staff to move to New Brunswick, Camden, or Newark. Well, that's another solution, but it involves different strategies to try to make that feasible. So I don't know if that answered your question, Brian, but a lot of the research suggests that if you sometimes someone who's telecommuting commutes just as much as someone who doesn't if they live closer. So, but I don't know if that's going to really, in the short term, that's not going to make too much difference, because a lot of faculty have already invested in where they're living, and there are lots of benefits to being present at certain times.
Great. Thanks, Bob. Thanks for that response. Turning to Xenia, I see a question about whether or not we've got the facilities that are sufficient to support anaerobic processing of food waste beyond the county level. Maybe you could just talk about sort of questions about volume and what Rutgers can, based on your analysis, what Rutgers can and can't support.
So anaerobic digestion is a strategy for organic waste, not just food waste, but it can also be for leaves and other materials. Right now, Rutgers is relatively small compared to Middlesex County. We're less than 10% of the food waste, or less than 10% of what we anticipate the whole food waste would be from the county. And more importantly, it's also seasonal. The students aren't here throughout the year, and anaerobic digestion facilities need a steady flow of organic materials. So it's not really feasible for us to do it by ourselves. I think we could be a location, we could build it into our research and education programs, but be a regional resource for everyone. So it's not something that we can do by ourselves. It's also a large capital investment as well. So I hope that answers the question.
I see some questions coming in around the Office of Sustainability and where that discussion stands. So I'm happy to talk about that, but I want to give Kevin or Bob, if he's on the line, the first response, because I know that this is part of the thinking that the task force maybe is coming in the next phase of the report.
Yeah, I'll just say something real briefly, and Bob, you can jump in as well. But obviously, this is something that we're looking at as part of the governance of the climate action plan. So we need to have an entity on campus that's going to be the caretaker of the climate action plan once it's delivered, because all of you that are on this web, and especially the faculty and staff, know that universities and colleges are really good at putting together plans and packages, and then it's like, okay, now who's going to do it? All right, so for purposes of implementation, I really think that this is something that an Office of Sustainability would be the caretaker of. We're going to put into the climate action plan, strong recommendations that is part of how the university should move forward. That is not something that I don't think, and maybe Brian, you can jump in as well, that we have to wait ultimately for the climate action plan to be fully delivered for us to start thinking about it. But it is something that I believe is an important piece to this for us moving forward. Bob, anything?
Yeah, thanks. So I agree with everything that Kevin just said. It's clear that we want the plan to actually be implemented, and therefore that means that somebody needs to be around to implement it. And I hope we certainly intend to get started thinking in the process of what that looks like, and hopefully get that in process before the plan itself is finalized.
Yeah. Thanks to both of you, and I think your points are right on. There's no sense in making a plan this detailed with this much work in it without there being a plan for implementation, and it's hard to see a way to get there without people who are dedicated to that work. So this is obviously not a call that's mine to make, but I think there's an incredibly strong case that you build an office of sustainability at the same time that you are thinking about how you implement your climate action plan and take next steps. On that subject, I think maybe we could turn back to Robin and Jessica sort of together. I was struck by some of the similarities between and the thinking between your presentations. And Robin, you made a comment about, in fact, when thinking about resilience, the university actually needs a much more comprehensive plan. And I wonder if you could say what's on your mind when you're thinking there, and what does that look like? And then I think for Jessica, it's along the same lines. When you think about Rutgers embracing its public mission, what does it mean to have a climate resilience plan and to think about this from a space of equity?
So I can just start, and then maybe Jennifer can take over. I was thinking really in terms of connecting. I think it's very much parallel with what the other group is doing, is connecting what's happening on the 3 campuses with what's happening in the communities. This really came up a lot in the town halls in February, and interest in sort of thinking about, because it's essentially the campus can't be resilient if the city of New Brunswick is not resilient. Newark's campus can't be resilient if Newark is underwater, et cetera. So they're really intertwined with what's happening in the community. So my thinking in terms of, I was thinking sort of at that spatial level. But I'll let Jennifer weigh in, and then I could follow up.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. Yeah,
sorry, Jessica.
No, that's fine. That's okay. No problem. You were close. Yeah, that's very much in line with our thinking as well. Rutgers' mission as the land grant institution, economic development in particular through the New Jersey Agricultural Experiment Station and the extension offices is built into Rutgers' mission. So one of the things we had been talking about, of course, is resiliency within our host communities within the 3 cities, but also through our extension offices. Rutgers actually has a presence in all in all of the counties in New Jersey. So there's a need to think even more broadly about how we can help the state become more resilient. Maybe prioritizing the 3 host communities, but we can certainly do more broadly within the state, thinking about all of the communities, whether urban and rural as well, because we have rural communities in South Jersey and we have a presence there. We have a food incubator in South Jersey and extension offices. So I just wanted to raise that point, that it's not just about resilience within the host communities.
Yeah, I guess I just could give a quick shout out to the Climate Adaptation Alliance that Marjorie Kaplan and Jeannie Herb have been heading up for 10 years now. That's really done a tremendous amount of work toward building resiliency in the state. And I almost feel like, in a way, Rutgers needs to catch up to where the state is at this point. We're we've actually unfortunately fallen a bit behind.
I'd say we've got about 5 minutes left in Q&A, and I wonder if I could just use moderator's privilege to pose a question really to the group and to Bob and Kevin in particular, now that we've seen through 2 nights these 7 or 8 different presentations. I think 7 total. And as we think about moving from phase 2 to phase 3 of your work, understanding that Rutgers faces all sorts of obstacles in lots of different directions, between the pandemic, financial situation, a host of competing priorities, but knowing that this one is central. What if you think about the 2 or 3 or 4 steps that the university should be thinking about immediately, as in the next 2 to 4 years. What does that look like from your perspective?
As it relates to the climate action plan and its ability to do what it needs to do, or just in general what the university kind of looks like?
As relates to the climate action plan.
Yeah, I think, and this is Kevin talking, with some elements of the climate action plan in play, I think that we as an institution have an opportunity to take advantage of the condition of the campus as it is now. I know that the term has been thrown out, I think, way too much, back to normal, and I don't like that term. I think it's an opportunity for us to come back better than we were before. If we come back and basically be normal, then that means that we're going to be practicing all the things that we were doing before we departed the university. So there are some low-hanging fruit opportunities within the climate action plan as we see it so far, and I'm sure we'll come up with some more potential solutions. But I really clearly think that this is an opportunity for us to double down and look at the university, how it functions, and be able to eliminate some redundancies and some other inefficient areas as it relates to our buildings and energy and such, and come in with a better plan that actually is efficient, actually should not and hopefully not add to the cost structure, but let's do it more, do it smart. And I think that this is a opportunity for us to use the climate action plan to move forward in that direction. Bob, anything?
Sorry, I'm logged on twice and can't unmute myself on my computer, but hopefully people can hear me. So I think I agree with what Kevin says, right? We need to think about this as a restart of campus operations. But I also think we need to double down on sort of the vision of, look, we're talking about trying to get to global net zero by 2050, right? That means incredibly ambitious targets at a state scale and at a national scale over the coming decade. And so, 5 years is a lot of time in terms of that sort of mitigation timescale. And so I think we need to put ourselves in a position where we can help lead that. And that means, I think, that having a strong messaging, a strong visibility at the level of the institution as a whole, that climate action is part of our identity as Rutgers, is probably the single most important thing we can do. And recognizing also that, like, we need to have our operational efforts in this area build upon our strong existing strengths on the research and education side, and amplifying those as well. I guess I agree with Kevin, clean restart. I also think we just need to really think seriously about the scale of the problem at a global scale and make that as a core part of our mission as a university.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks for those responses. It's helpful to hear and a lot to think about. It's 7 o'clock, so let me turn this back over to Kevin for the next part of our program.
Okay, thanks, Brian. We're going to take a 5-minute break, but before we do that, just a couple of announcements. Again, remember to use the Menti to start putting in your thoughts about your thinking behind our climate action plan of the task force. Number 2, I want to acknowledge all the folks. If you guys have noticed, especially if you attended the first night and tonight, the number of faculty, staff, and students and alumni that have participated in the working groups is outrageous. And I mean that in a positive way, that these folks have taken the time out of their schedule to participate in something that I believe is university-wide and clearly important. I want to thank Brian for sure. He's been our inside champion. Tony Calcado, you probably have heard that name before, but he's been a strong supporter. Kim Manning-Lewis and her team as far as the communications and marketing of what we're doing. I think that's brilliant as well. But top honors to Angie. Angie Olberg is our administrative director, or Dr. Angie. In addition to her academic credentials, to be able to administratively direct us in this endeavor has been brilliant. So let's take a 5-minute break. Everyone, please come back at 7:05 where we'll start the breakout rooms. And I believe that's where all the fun comes in, where you guys get to provide your input. Okay, so let's take a 5-minute break. Okay, everyone. So we're going to conclude now. I am hoping that you had some vibrant conversations within your breakout groups. Again, all of the information was being captured and it'll be shared amongst the task force as we start to go to phase 3. So I'm hoping that you feel that this exercise was a benefit to you. It definitely is going to be a benefit to us as a task force. What you see up on the screen now is your contributions to the Menti. So if you look at the cloud words, obviously the bigger the word is, the more that particular word was used. So responsible, sustainable. Obviously, the one that I like the most is community. Not only the Rutgers community, but the communities that surround the campuses. If we're resilient, we expect that as part of a higher education learning institution that Camden, Newark, New Brunswick, and all the other touch cities that touch us are being resilient and climate neutral with us. So as you step off campus, think about your community as well all the time. Rutgers as a leader, you know, we take pride in that, and we're the state university of New Jersey. And so people should be looking to us for climate neutrality and resiliency. And I believe we're there, we're getting there even stronger. So please keep an eye on us for that. Okay, so with that said, I really want to thank everyone for taking the time out today to be a part of this. This is very important. This is a large community, and I'm so happy that we have representation from every corner of the university with this very important topic. So with that said, I'm going to turn the rest of your night back over to you, and we'll be in touch, and look out for phase 2's report. So this way you'll have an idea of what we're up to, and stay in contact with us, please. So good night to everyone.